Okay, so today I thought I'd kind of take you to a long forgotten part of my past in a deep dark corner of our basement. My wife's probably going to kill me for this, but this was an entertainment center that I built probably about 25 years ago. And back then our TVs were shaped different. They had a big box on the back, and we had to have a spot for the VCR and a place for all our video cassette tapes and different things like that. But this was a fun project that I built. The doors open, had the pocket hole doors that slid back so they'd be out of the way when you was watching TV. Now you can see it's kind of a storage place for our misfit toys. But today our needs have changed. Our TVs are bigger, they're thinner, they're a lot lighter. And so today we're going to build a new, let's not call it an entertainment center, let's just call it a TV cabinet built for our modern TVs. And that brings us to today's project. This is what I'm calling a TV cabinet. It's about just over 6 feet long. It's only about 18 inches tall, and it's about 17 inches deep. We've got a couple of drawers and a couple of doors for storage. Our TV will sit up on top. Our TV is only about 48 inches long or so. So we're going to have a little room on each side to display something, as well as on the shelf down below. So this was a fun project. Stick around with me and I'll show you how I built it. So I got started today without you guys. I glued up a couple of walnut panels. This is just a short one here, and this will actually become two different pieces. And then we've got one more that will be a long piece. That will be our bottom shelf of our project today. And then I've made 3 of these plywood frames. If you've watched any of my videos before, you've seen me use these before. And I've got 3 of those, which will be the very top of our case, the bottom of our case, and our back. And you'll kind of see how I'm going to use those as we get into the project. But our next step is to I've got to make a couple more panels that will be a frame and panel construction. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with that. If you have any questions about how I made these panels or do these glue ups or milling or anything like that, I've started a series that I've put out. There's a couple of videos. We've got some more that will be coming. But you can go ahead and go take a look at those. It shows how I make my web frame panels, and then also how I mill my lumber and get it ready for a glue up to glue up into a panel. So let's get started. So I've got some walnut here that I've already milled up, and we'll start cutting out some parts. So I've got some parts and pieces here for a panel that we're making, and this is a pretty small panel. But I have 2 rails here, and those are 1.5 inches wide. And then I've got 2 stiles here. One of them is 1.5 inches wide, and one of them is 2 inches wide. And the reason for that is this stile will actually be embedded into a 1/4 inch dado. So that'll take up a 1/4 inch. And then we're going to have a 1/4 inch groove for another 1/4 inch panel to fit in. And so that'll leave 1.5 inches revealed, and so that's why that one is a little wider. And oftentimes I'll make my stiles different widths if I'm putting one up next to a face frame. If you watch some of my builds, you've seen me do that before. And then the thickness of that face frame, if this was the face frame, would make up the difference of the stiles. And so sometimes I'll do that as well. What I'm also doing with this panel is we're going to offset the panel to the inside. And so we're going to run a 1/4 inch groove down each edge. And I'm actually going to set it 5/16 in from the outside face. And what that's going to do is allow me to come back and wrap that panel with some molding and trim work when we get to that point. And so that's going to make it a little more difficult to create our tenons on our rails to fit into our stiles. But that's something that I think it's worth it just to offset that panel a little bit. I've got my dado stack set at a 1/4 inch wide, and a 1/2 inch tall. We'll go ahead and run all those grooves. And I've gone ahead and put my regular blade back into the table saw, and we'll cut those shoulders to make our tongues for our rails. And we'll use the 10-inning jig to cut those cheeks. Okay, so we've got our parts here for our panel. We're just going to go ahead and test fit these together, just to make sure we like the fit of them, make sure we've got everything just as we want it. Okay, that's nice and tight, looks really good. Our joints are pretty even. I'll measure it quickly here for square. Just a hair over 17 3/4. And just a hair over 17 3/4. So we know we're nice and square. We'll go ahead and measure for our panel now. You can either use a 1/4 inch piece of plywood, but I'm going to go ahead and just use solid walnut. And these panels will actually be, I'll be using some grain to grain match other panels through the project. So we'll be doing some resawing and cutting out some 1/4 inch panels. So while I resaw this walnut, I just want to thank you guys for checking out my video. It really means a lot to me that you take the time to watch these, and that helps me to bring more of these out. And that would make a beautiful book match panel. And I'm just marking to keep track of these pieces as we cut this panel apart. I want to be able to use those panels with a continuous grain going through the project, and that'll just help me keep track of where they go. As I prepare to assemble these panels, I'm going to go ahead and pre-finish those. I like to do that, and that way it'll get those finished everywhere we need to have it. Now I can start cutting these panels to their final size and get ready to assemble the carcass. Here I'm just using the plywood frame to make sure that the bottom shelf is exactly the same size. I've got the table saw set up to start cutting our dados and rabbets for our assembly. We're going to start cutting some dados across for our dividers. We've got these dividers that go on the outside, as well as these that will go on the inside. So all of our dados will be cut 3/4 of an inch wide, with the exception of 2 dados along the back, which will be a 1/4 inch for some panels that will go in the back. But the rest of them will be cut 3/4 of an inch wide. The one difference I am going to make is the depth of cut, because I want the remaining material to be a 1/2 inch. So if you take this dado here, this bottom part that's left, that's a 1/2 inch thick. And because our solid walnut and our plywood is different thicknesses, we're going to change the depth of our dado stack when we cut those. And I'm using my table saw fence to line up those dados, and I'll just cut one on one end of the shelf and then flip that around to cut the other side. Here I've lowered the blade just to leave that 1/2 inch that we talked about. This will be what is called a break front cabinet. And so with the top and bottom frames, as well as the walnut shelf, the bottom shelf, we're going to cut these corners out. And you'll see how we finish that up later in the project. Okay, so there's the first dry fit of all of our parts and pieces that we've made so far. And it's always a little bit of a relief when it comes together and looks at least a little bit like it's supposed to. I do have it upside down right now, and very happy with the way things are fitting. I think our next step will be to make some back panels. There'll be some 1/4-inch panels in between here. These ones will be a framing panel just like this because that will be visible. And I'm still kind of in the trying to design and figure it out stage. I know that our front corners here, 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 and here are all going to have a foot. And then we'll have a foot on the back corner and probably something in the middle in the back just for some support there too. But I'm trying to decide if I should make that foot part of the whole corner or if it should just be kind of its own little thing on the bottom. And again, you know, this is upside down, so the foot would be up here. So I'm kind of still thinking about that, but it's the end of the day, so I've got some time to think about what I want to do there. But we do need to make those back panels, and then we'll work on our face frame, and we'll have some kind of a support out here on this front corner as well. Like I said, I don't know if that'll be like a full leg or if I'll do something different. Still trying to make up my mind there. So that's where we're at so far. We'll see what happens. Okay, so we're back on our project this morning. We've had a night to kind of think about what we wanted to do as far as our feet and whether we'd make those part of the styles or not of the face frame. And I've decided to go ahead and make the feet just their own piece. So what we need to do now, what I've done, as I've gone ahead and made a couple more panels for the inside pieces here. And those are just 1/4-inch panels, and they're slipped in those dados that we cut in our pieces. And then I've gone ahead and made the back panels as a frame and panel construction for this part that will be visible. And this, at some point, will get molding around it, as well as this panel on the side. Some trim pieces to kind of clean those, or fancy those up a little bit. As you can see right here, we're still sticking out past the edge of the rest of the carcass here. And that's on purpose, because what I wanted to do was be able to visually see this corner here. And that looks really wide to me right now. So I wanted to be able to trim that down and get that to where visually it'll look kind of like the rest of the styles in the face frame and stuff. And so we are going to trim this down just a little bit. And then if there's anything left over, we'll just trim that off this side as well and bring that in flush with the rest of the carcass. So we can go ahead and just pull this panel out. We'll make those changes and get that put back in. Okay, so I've spent the last few minutes cutting out some square blanks for a turning. And these are 1.5-inch square, and our finished product is going to be 12 and 3/8 inches long. But I've got these cut out to about 14 inches just to give us a little extra room. And I've gone ahead and made some marks to determine where I want to turn. We're going to just leave the top and the bottom part square, and then we're going to turn a bead and then just do a nice, I guess a wide bead through the middle there. And so I've got a line to mark the middle of it and kind of give me a reference point for that, and then some other marks to kind of do our turnings out from there. So I've got this little small bench top lathe here, and it's not bad for turning small things like you know, pens and things like that. It's pretty underpowered for turning stuff like this, but I have used it to turn stuff like this, and so we're going to go ahead and try that again and see what happens. Yes, that lathe is moving all over. And I don't know why that's not driving me nuts, but eventually it just stopped moving and I just kept turning. And I decided not to leave the tops and bottom of those square, so I went ahead and rounded those off as well. And here's the two turnings together. I was able to get those pretty close to the same. And this is where they'll be on the corner of the project. Here I'm cutting out some of our pieces for our face frame. And then I went ahead and made these little square pieces to go to the bottom of the turn column that you can see there. I just wanted to round over that top edge. So here I'm making some trim to go around the panels for the framing panels that we made. We'll need quite a few of these. We'll go ahead and trim out our doors as well with this, so I'll go ahead and make all the molding now. So now we can start marking those pieces to length and just wrap those panels with that trim. And that jig I made for the table saw to cut the 45s for these trim pieces. Pretty simple jig and it works really well. It's really sped up this process of doing that. And I'm putting just a small amount of glue on there. We're going to try and keep that off of the panel. And then just a couple of pin nails to hold those in place. Okay, so we've got our trim molding applied to our panels that need it. And we've also done all our final sanding on the interior surfaces. And the surfaces are going to be hard to sand once we start assembling the case. Got all our panels and everything sanded. And we've got the final sanding done on our columns that we turned on our lathe here. And so we're ready to go ahead, I think, and start assembling this cabinet. And I'll make sure that I get plenty of glue into those dados, especially when I'm using plywood. And I like to make sure that I pre-drill anytime that I'm using screws just to avoid any split. Okay, so now our case is all glued up and we're ready to start our face frame. And so I've gone ahead and I've milled down some more walnut. It's all 3/4 of an inch thick. And then I've just got, I've started cutting a few pieces to various lengths and widths and stuff. And we're just gonna go ahead and start wrapping our face frame around the case here. And a lot of times I'll make the face frame, screw it together and everything, and then attach it to the case. But with all the different folds and stuff like that, we're going to go ahead and just attach it to the case kind of somewhat as we go. And I think I'm going to start in the center here, and then we'll wrap each side.
I decided to go with just a couple of brad nails here to hold that in place.
Okay, so we have our face frame all applied onto our case now, and I've gone ahead and sanded that with 80 grit, so it's kind of ready to go to the next step here. And I think what we're going to do is go ahead and do our feet and our base of the cabinet. And so I've gone ahead and I've milled up a couple of turning blocks here. These are just 1 3/4 inch square, and our feet are going to be about 2 1/4 inches long. And so we're just going to make them real simple. They're going to kind of be tucked under the cabinet just a little bit, so they won't be a major focal point, but we'll go ahead and do 6 of those for the front of the cabinet. And I think I'll be able to get about 4 or 5 out of each turning, so I've got an extra one just to get 1 or 2 more if I need to. And so we'll go ahead and do those. We'll go ahead and make probably 2 more feet. We won't turn those on the lathe, but they'll just kind of go in the back of the cabinet up where you won't ever see those. So we'll probably just do those out of probably some poplar or some secondary wood that I have sitting around the shop.
I like to refresh those pencil marks every once in a while just to keep those layout lines. And now we'll go ahead and start turning some of our areas to the diameter that we need.
So I spent a better part of an afternoon creating these little feet. I know you just watched that footage of me doing that, and I've decided that I don't like it. So I'm going to save these feet for maybe a different project, but I've decided they don't really fit what I'm doing here. And sometimes that happens where I kind of design as I go along. Sometimes I do something and I find out that it just is not what I'm looking for, and so I'm just going to make a pivot and do something a little different.
I decided that I needed a foot that wasn't quite so skinny looking, and where these were going to be tucked under, they just needed to be pretty plain and simple, and so that's what I chose to do rather than those turned feet. This will be the backing for some trim pieces that will go around the bottom of our base. This is the profile of the first piece that will make up the trim work around the base. I'll actually do this in 2 different pieces. I make sure I get plenty of glue on those miters just to hold those together. And here it is with the second piece applied. And I decided to take a few minutes here and glue up a couple of boards that will become our top. And biscuits will just help with alignment. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the pieces that we need for our doors and drawer fronts, and we can get those made as well. Those were assembled just like the panels that we did before.
Okay, so I went ahead and have assembled our doors and our drawer fronts. As you might recall, we had our panels made when we made our panels for the other parts of the case. So they just needed to be cut to size and then of course pre-finished before we assemble those into the doors and the drawer fronts. And I've got those sanded to 80 grit, so we'll need to do some more sanding later on, but they're still just a little bit oversized to the opening. And so we need to go ahead and cut those to fit the opening, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then originally I had intended this center section to be a door to open. And I kind of decided against that, mainly because with these outer sections, I'm going to open the doors from the center. They'll open out. And I've always hated having a center section. Which way do you open it? Which, because it puts a knob or something, it just doesn't look symmetrical. So I decided I didn't like that. We're going to go ahead and go with 2 drawers. I don't know if that's neurotic or not, but that's kind of where we're at. That's what we're going to go with. And so we've also now got to build a couple of drawer boxes. I also went ahead and pulled our top panel out of the clamps and I ran it through the drum sander, so it's kind of ready for its next step. But we're going to put that on the back burner for a while. That's one of the last things I like to do. And so that's going to kind of be put away for a bit. And we'll go ahead and finish up our doors and our drawers.
Now as I trim up these doors, I'll just sneak up on that fit, taking off just a little bit on each pass. And I'll try and make sure that I take a little bit off of each side. And because our opening was just a little bit out of square there, you saw me use just a little piece of wedge there. And that will just kind of clean that up and make that fit the door opening better. Here I'm resawing a piece of alder. I've decided that's what I'll use for my drawer boxes. It was just something I had in the shop, and so I'm going to go ahead and resaw those boards down. Just save myself a little time at the planer. And Knotty alder comes with quite a few checks and cracks and stuff, but I'll just use a little epoxy. I'll dye that with a dark brown tint, and a little bit of epoxy in there really cleans those up. And I like to do just a little pre-sanding, but I'll run these boards through the planer to clean off that epoxy that's sticking up above the board.
So these boards are now ready to be used to build our drawers. I've gone ahead and done the epoxy on both sides, and then I've run those through the planer, and I will take the planer and plane that down just enough that it just cuts it off the top, kind of cleans that up. I might have a little bit of spots with some epoxy residue left that will come out in the sanding later on and stuff like that. But that's kind of how I take care of those checks and cracks and the knots and stuff and make those boards usable. And so now we can go ahead and build some drawers.
I decided to go with my Porter cable dovetailing jig for these drawers. I like it because when you're doing half-blind dovetails, you can do both sides of the joint in one operation. It just makes it really quick and pretty easy to do. I went ahead and glued those boxes up, and then I'll go ahead and chamfer the corners on those with my block plane, and then I can run that through the joiner and just make that drawer fit just right to the opening.
So we had our drawers all fitted to the box, and so I went ahead and I finished sanded our drawer fronts and our doors, and I've applied the molding. I did that just the same as we did on the panels for the case. So what we need to do now is we're going to do a little bit of finishing on the inside. I think I'm going to go ahead and finish the inside of these parts here, and then I need to finish fitting the doors. We do have the holes bored for the hinges, and as soon as I get the finish done and stuff on here, we can install those hinges, and then we'll go ahead and finish setting these doors in there. With these hinges, it should give us about a 1 millimeter gap or so on that edge, and so we'll just need to probably touch up these other 3 edges in order to fit those. And then we still need to finish our top. I've also gone ahead and cut these pieces of trim molding, same molding that we used on the doors and drawer fronts and the panels. And so we'll go ahead, a little bit of glue and some pin nails to hold those on to dress that up. So over the last few minutes, I've been final fitting our doors. I've got the hinges installed, and I have been fitting those to the opening for the final time, just getting my gaps and stuff just right. As you can see, those doors are ready to go. I've got our drawer fronts all fit and ready to go as well. They're not attached to the boxes right now. They're just kind of sitting in there just to kind of take a look at it. But we are just about ready for finish and to finish up this project. We just need to finish up our top, and then we're going to go ahead and apply a piece of molding trim work underneath that just to kind of dress that transition up there a little bit. And so we're getting really close on this, getting excited to have this one done. Let's finish it up.
Here I'm using just a portion of a 1/4 inch radius round over bit just to give me kind of a thumbnail profile on the edge of that. And a little bit of file work to clean up that inside corner.
So that wraps up this project. I did go ahead and finished it with a hard wax oil. I like that finish. It works well in a dusty shop, very friendly for a dusty shop. You just kind of wipe it on, wipe it off, and it's been durable, and they look really good. If you guys have any questions or comments, please drop those down below. I'd love to hear what you think and answer any questions that you might have. And again, thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.